Hey, anyone want to talk about races and the origins of magic? Hey everybody, Jordan here. The PH is silent, and this is part of a 30-day challenge for the month of December. We're going to build a fantasy world. My fantasy world is called Endegar, and there's a playlist. I think it's over here. I get confused because of the mirrored thing. But there's going to be a playlist there if you want to watch it from the very beginning. In this video, we're going to be talking about the races of my world, Endegar, and also the magic system. And I shouldn't say system, but like where does magic come from and how prevalent is magic? So let's hop on over to Notion and we'll get started. Switch over to our Notion view. Going through, this is day 6 and we're going to talk about races. And specifically, if we go to Web Writer and the races, we want to know, like, based on the climate, and it's interesting because this exercise is for a novel, and they're assuming you're kind of making up your own fantasy races, whereas I want my setting to be adaptable to Dungeons & Dragons 5e, so I'm kind of taking the playable races that are in the player's handbook and various other whatevers, and we're going to switch them up. And they're going to have different origins rather than like a Forgotten Realms world. So the exercise itself is spend 10 minutes figuring out what people who evolved in each major area of your world would look like, and then spend another 5 minutes asking what if this group encountered that group, would they fight, trade, both, intermarry, blend, genetics, and things like that. So, there's a piano playing upstairs. I don't know if you can hear that, but so we are going to run this exercise, but it is going to be slightly different. Because we're going to focus on the races of Endegar and playable races for players, because this is a Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting, or just a tabletop RPG fantasy campaign. Now, these are the 5e races for Dungeons & Dragons. Some of these are from Magic the Gathering, and some of them are from Eberron and the core handbook, and so on. Now, I feel like a lot of campaign settings, in order for them to make themselves stand out, they usually create a new type of race. But at this point, I don't know what I would do race-wise. Like, I'm not sure exactly, except for the Verthandi, which I want to create, and those are the ancient goblins. But we have goblins, and so that's fine. But I want to take the goblins and then I'll make a better race out of them somewhere. Or I say better, but like a different race out of that. So here are all of these really interesting D&D 5e races, and then I thought, what do I want in mind? So unlike the Forgotten Realms and unlike some other campaign settings, even Eberron, where Wizards of the Coast specifically wanted any race has a place in those campaign settings because they wanted it to be open. I like the idea of a hard line, you can't play certain races. And we saw this later on with things like Theros. Now in the Theros campaign setting, we had, like, here are the races that would be part of Theros, but you're not going to see Jannasi or hobgoblins or things like that. So here's what I got. Human, the majority of civilizations, human can be found all over Endegar. They can be found living with orcs, elves, dwarves, or living alone. For safety and strength, humans live together in larger cities. So you don't see a lot of humans by themselves. Dwarves. Dwarves are the retainers of the belief in the gods. They live in mountains and underground. So we have these warlock humans that are making pacts with magical creatures for power, and we haven't gotten into the deities of Endegar, but there are deities of Endegar, and the pact keepers are at odds with deities because that is a way to get magic that is a little too unselfish and complicated. To devote yourself to a single idea or a deity in order to obtain power on that deity's whim doesn't seem as effective as me just making a pact with Asmodeus and getting power. So with the pact keepers not able to fully take over the dwarven settlements, the dwarves kind of have this they're holding on to the belief in the gods, and they keep the fire burning for the gods. Do the gods need that? We don't know. But they, if you want to be a cleric, going through steps of being part of a dwarf enclave, whether you're a human living there or not, would be good, because the dwarves are going to have they're going to retain the belief in the gods. Now, elves are going to be holders of the belief in nature. So they're going to be more of a nomadic kind of culture, and maybe some of them have figured out how to go back to the Feywild and things like that, because I like elves coming from Fey, and that could be fun and interesting. So we could definitely play with elves doing that, but I like this idea of you have divine magic, you have arcane magic, and then you have nature magic, and that's where rangers and druids and things like that. So a lot of elves here are going to not necessarily be wizards like you would see in Forgotten Realms, but they're going to be more earthy and get their power from their surroundings. And then there's a subtle tie in there. We'll get to this later when we talk about magic, where I want the divine magic of the gods and the nature magic of nature might be the same thing. We don't really know. Is it two different ways of worshiping the same thing? Could be. Halflings. I like halflings, so I wanted them in. So originally, they lived in isolation. They have since acclimated with living in humans, and you don't really find halfling communities anymore. Or if they're wherever, they just kind of live and work in cities with humans. Gnomes are the holders of the belief in magic, in the arcane magic. Now, gnomes secretly practice the art of wizardry and the schools of magic. They tinker and try to understand magic and the weave. Now, I use the weave because I didn't have a better word for this here, but I don't want to actually use that. So we're going to change that text to orange. Anything that's orange is stuff that I need to figure out later. But a better way of saying this is we'll just say understand magic and its source, and we should put that there. Half-elf, a product of two worlds. They could live with elves or they could live with humans. Half-orc, a product of two worlds. They could live with orcs, they could live with humans. Now, tieflings and Aasimar. I don't want tieflings and I don't want Aasimar to be a playable race. They are in Endegar, but to literally be descendant of a magical being seems very big. You will definitely stand out. So tieflings are part fiend. They are feared, but they're also treated like royalty within human cities. Some tieflings hide their ancestry, and if you are known to be a tiefling, you are feared by most, and no one wants to bring the anger of your parental figure. So Asmodeus, or the Quadrivium, which are the people that kind of worship these Endegar greater powers, such as Pact of the, like a Fiendish Pact, or the various pacts that warlocks can get to. So the various powerful creatures that you can make a pact with to gain magic. This could be Fae, this could be a lot of different things. So they are scared of you in a way, but there's a lot of respect that too. And that is despite the fact that you may or may not be related to Asmodeus or something. It could just be a random pit fiend or something like that. Jannasi are humans who underwent a process as children to be magically infused with elemental energy, or perhaps even an elemental spirit. And I like this idea where if the pact keepers are making pacts with other creatures, they're like, well, how can we take that a step further and bypass that? So I want to say they did experiments on children who grew up being, as babies, they were infused with this elemental spirit, and now they have an attunement to nature, or not nature, but to like earth or wind or something like that. So Jannasi are pretty rare, but it could be a fun plot point to play one. I like Goliaths, so they're going to be like a barbarian tribe. They're non-threatening to most people. They just kind of live up in the north, and they're believed to be uncivilized, but if you ever want to play it and we figure out, they're probably very knowledgeable about the history of the world through, some kind of oral tradition or something like that. Aasimar, the same thing, part celestial. Aasimar are respected but feared, and much like tieflings, they have a greater power ancestry, and if they want to, they can choose to hide it. So, Furbolg. Furbolg intrigue me. They are very rare keepers of nature, peaceful, and there are not a lot of them. They mostly stay out of the fight, living a nomadic life of solitude. And I kind of just picture them as not an actual Tom Bombadil, but a I don't know, Tom Bombadil. Goblins. Goblins are very old tales of goblin great cities. Their people were not so different from humans and elves, but early goblins defied the fates. They tried to take over Endegar and other worlds, and they were cursed. So they presently live in small groups in the wild or as servants in larger cities. Hobgoblins and bugbears are just a larger form of goblin, but still a goblin. Dwarves live underground. Orcs live in the mountains. They are somewhat nomadic, hunting and gathering. Some humans live with them, and they often trade with dwarves, food for weapons, for weapons and armor, etc. And then finally, I just really enjoy lizard folk, and I want to incorporate them as some kind of, from across the ocean, these weird creatures come, these lizard creatures. So maybe the other continent will be a lizard folk-centered continent. But they are strangers to Endegar here, and we'll see where that takes us. So those are the playable races in my game. The next section we're going to talk about is, in the 30-day world building challenge, is how prevalent is magic and where does it come from? These are really good questions. And I was going to say that divine magic, worshiping the deities, very little. I think that if the Pact Keepers are trying to establish themselves as the dominant power, they're not going to encourage people to be worshiping gods. So, I think that to worship a deity is to defy the Pact Keepers. So you don't see a lot of people doing it, or they're not doing it openly. Secondly, magic that is studied takes years to do, and not a lot of people have the patience for that. And so that's why you see more Pact Keepers than you do wizards. Even though the gnomes are very invested in this style of arcane magic. Nature magic is not explosive and crazy, and so a lot of those spells will be subtle, and a creature not knowing what they're doing might not even understand that they're casting a spell. Like maybe just nature helps you out. How does that work in a 5th edition magic heavy system? I'm not really sure yet, but your players can do maybe ridiculously crazy things because they are the heroes of the story. A druid can shape change into a bunch of animals, or can summon forth a giant hand that will grasp people. And maybe your wizard can do the same thing because they are special. And I like the idea of them being special in this world rather than just another NPC. In that sense, I think a lot of creatures know that magic exists. They're not necessarily scared of it, but it's not obtainable for a lot of people unless you dedicate your life to magic, or you are willing to make a pact with another entity to thus gain power relatively quickly, gain magical power. Where does magic come from? I think that there is I don't know, for lack of a better word, the force, but like magic is a part of the universe, and learning how to pull and manipulate that is the art of magic. And there are magical beings like fey creatures or fiends or just, I don't know, they're like unicorns. There's just magical beings, celestial beings. And these are beings of magic. And part of this campaign setting, I wanted to create a set of crafting rules for creating magical items that are detrimental to the wizard. So in older editions of D&D, you would create a wand or a magic sword or something, and it would cost you experience points to actually build that sword. And I like that idea. We have so many magic items, but we don't know really like where they come from a lot of times. And this system that I wanted to create was, if I am a wizard and I want to create a magical staff, I invest part of myself into that staff. Part of me becomes with the staff. And so to reflect that stat-wise, maybe your strength goes down by 2 or 3 points, or your constitution goes down. But this staff gives you, maybe an increase to your intelligence, or maybe it does other things. So it's a counterbalance to what you want to be better at, you're better at, but you do take a penalty. Now, there's a way around this, and that is to bind a magical creature, like a fae or a fiend, into an item, and that will grant it magical powers without sacrificing yourself. That was kind of the idea that started this whole world building exercise. Is I like this idea of like, oh, the quick and easy way out is to summon a fiend, trap it in a sword. Now I've got a +1 sword, but how reliable is that sword? And is that sword trying to corrupt me? And but like it's the quick and easy way to gain power. And so that kind of spawned this whole idea. So magic is around us and there. There's the various planes of existence. I'll show you guys a little, my phone's things. I'll show you guys a little bit about the planes. I had this idea for the Platonic Solids. Now the Platonic Solids are Plato, and they are solids that have equal sides and equal corners and stuff like that. I'm not good at explaining it, but if you search Platonic Solids, you can find them. And specifically, Kepler, the mathematician, astrologist, great guy from the 1500s, I think, he believed that the Platonic Solids kind of defined the universe. So these are things where he thought that a tetrahedron was wrapped around a dodecahedron, and a square was wrapped around the tetrahedron, and so forth, creating this like shell of the world. And so there are 6 spheres of various distance from each other, and it's a heliocentric universe. So we start with an octahedron, and then an icosahedron, a dodecahedron, a tetrahedron, a cube, and those are all wrapped in a sphere. And I liked this idea that I wanted to use it, so I kind of plotted them out, and I was like, okay, well, the octahedron is going to be the world below, or the ethereal plane. So that's that like sub world that you can kind of get into, but you don't really understand it, and it kind of makes sense like that might be where ghosts go, because if they don't want to leave and ascend, they go down and they remain, but they're not on the physical world. They're in the ethereal. So that's the octahedron, the world below. The icosahedron is Endigar. So one step up from the ethereal plane is the prime material, or Endigar. One step up above that is a dodecahedron, the world above, or the astral plane. And I liked this idea. The more I was thinking about it, I kind of took the idea of an astral plane being a dodecahedron and overlaying that over the Great Wheel cosmology, and it really made me smile that it sort of lined up. Like we have the interconnecting points and things like that, all kind of centered around the prime material plane here. So that was fun. I liked that kind of worked out. So the astral plane envelops all of the outer planes and possibly the inner planes, and they're just kind of interconnected that way. And the astral plane is really what gives us magic, because it's pulling all of these weird forces, and it's the binding energy between all of them. And then above that is a tetrahedron, and that's Hyperborea. That is where the souls of the dead go. So if you are mortal and you die and you lived a good life or something and you don't want to stay as a ghost, you go to Hyperborea, and we don't really know because no one has come back from Hyperborea. Once you're there, you're there. You have no unfinished business. And then finally, and I should say the dodecahedron is also where like fiends, angels, all of these creatures are from there. Now, and the final one is a cube, and that is the home of the gods. And nobody's really been there except the gods. And the gods are less direct than they are in something like the Forgotten Realms. But yeah. So that's the Mysterium Cosmographicum, which is kind of explaining these Platonic solids and how they interact with a fourth dimensional universe. And I liked that. Basically, Platonic solids, the D4, the D6, those also translate to specific elements that Plato, the philosopher, attributed them to. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I like that they have something attributed to them. So fire was a D4, and it was a D4 because D4s are pointy and they hurt when you step on them, so that fire hurts, so that must be a D4. Earth is a D6, because a D6 earth crumbles. Like you hold it in your hand, clay, and it chips away, kind of like a bunch of D6s together. They'll block apart and fall away. Air is a D8 because it is hard to hold in your hands and it kind of wiggles around. Water is a D20 because it easily rolls off your hand. And that was his rationale for that. Now, the D12, the dodecahedron, is the ether or the astral plane. And this was the final element that man did not have control of. And it is the element of the air, or of the ethereal, like what the stars are made of, what the gods do with it. And so that's why the dodecahedron encompasses the great wheel cosmology. Trying to explain magic kind of explains my whole universe. And it's all based on math and things like that. But humans can visit the astral plane. They can visit a lot of these other areas, but they've never been to Hyperborea, strictly because once you go there, you don't come back. It's kind of, I mean, nobody's come back from heaven and told us what it's like. So going back, we kind of talked about our races. I didn't really talk where they are. We can go to the map though. Basically, we're gonna have humans down here, elves down here, dwarves in here, maybe some orcs living around in here. Up here, we're gonna have the Goliaths. Goblins are just scattered everywhere. They just kind of exist. They don't have a home place. I did like a deserty kind of elf that might live here. So the elves that migrated over here just kind of, they grew up in a harsher environment. I don't know, the idea of a desert elf. And then maybe some Goliath or some dwarven settlements over here as well. And these could be very different dwarves from the dwarves over here. Yeah, and I left out aquatic races. I think Sahagwin might live in here, and Sahagwin might also be a cursed race that occurred at some point, but not a playable race. But a goblin would be a playable. These videos just keep getting longer and longer. I apologize. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. What is your, how prevalent is magic? Do you like high magic? Do you like low magic? Do you like a mixture of magic and technology like a lot of people do? And how limited do you want to make your races? Does your world have a Feywild? Does it have a Shadowfell? Are you trying to use the Great Wheel cosmology like I am, but viewing it in a different way? I would like to know. Let me know in the comments below. Again, this was day 6, and I will see you guys all tomorrow with another episode of the 30-Day World Building Challenge. Take care.